Rasputin raises his glass. Poison. No effect. Then pistols. He falls. Gets up again. Another shot. Still alive. Eventually he's dumped in an icy river. His lungs full of water. He drowned. The man who influenced an empire didn't die easily. His killers tried to bury him. Instead, a myth was born. Rasputin wasn't forgotten. He became immortal. He wasn't born in a palace. He was born in the dirt. January 1869. Pokrovskoye. A forgotten village buried deep in the Siberian snow. Winters lasted half the year. Wolves howled at night. Hunger was a fact of life. Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin came into this world screaming like any other child. But by the time he could walk, the village whispered. He didn't blink like other children. He watched people too long. He wandered into the woods and spoke of visions no one understood. His family were peasants, poor, illiterate, devout. Rasputin didn't go to school. He didn't learn to read until adulthood. His early life was filled with muck, frostbite, and hard labor. And yet, something about him felt out of place in that world. As a teenager, Rasputin earned a reputation as a troublemaker. He drank heavily, fought often. Some said he stole horses. Others claimed he could calm a violent drunk with just a stare. In a place ruled by superstition, that made him dangerous, or divine. Villagers said he could see into people's hearts, that he could name your sins before you spoke them. Some avoided him. Others followed him. He was no scholar, no priest, but he was something people couldn't explain. In his early 20s, Rasputin abandoned his wife and children and left Pokrovskoye. He set off on a pilgrimage, a spiritual journey through Russia's ancient monasteries and sacred sites. But it wasn't just faith he was chasing, it was power. And from the cold, black soil of Siberia, a legend began to rise. Rasputin didn't find God in silence. He found him in chaos. While other holy men isolated themselves in cold monasteries and dusty scriptures, Rasputin wandered, not just through forests, but through his own hunger for ecstasy and pain. Somewhere along the way, he encountered the Klists, a radical sect of Russian Orthodoxy. They believed something dangerous, that salvation came not from resisting sin, but from embracing it. You had to fall before you could rise. They danced wildly in circles, whipped themselves, shouted prayers through tears and blood. And in their rituals, Rasputin saw something beautiful. He took their creed and made it his own. He drank until he collapsed. He seduced women, poor villagers, noble daughters, even nuns. Then he'd kneel in front of icons and beg forgiveness, his voice cracking with sorrow. To outsiders, it looked like madness. But to Rasputin, it was the divine cycle: sin, confession, cleansing, and repeat. He said, "The faster you sin, the faster you're saved." And people listened. They came to him for healing, for guidance, for permission. Because Rasputin didn't preach perfection. He gave them permission to be broken. And then, somehow, whole again. In taverns, they called him a holy man. In churches, a heretic. He was magnetic, hypnotic. The line between holy and unholy blurred when he entered a room. To some, he was a vessel of God. To others, a walking blasphemy. But whether miracle or madness, one thing was certain. Rasputin had found a way to make people believe. And belief, he would soon learn, was the most powerful drug of all. By 1905, whispers of Rasputin had drifted out of Siberia and reached the icy marble corridors of St. Petersburg. Among aristocrats and bishops, his name was a curiosity. A wild-eyed peasant healer, barefoot in the snow, with eyes that saw too much. At first, the Russian elite laughed. Then they listened. Then they invited him in. In the imperial palace, Tsarina Alexandra lived in quiet torment. Her son, Alexei, the only male heir to the Romanov dynasty, was born with hemophilia, a rare and deadly blood disorder. A simple bruise could mean death. A stumble could end the monarchy. Doctors were helpless. Treatments failed. Bleeding episodes came without warning, and with each one, Alexandra watched her son slip closer to the grave. She prayed. She wept. And then, someone mentioned Rasputin. He arrived uninvited. No medical training, no noble blood, just that stare, calm, burning, unblinking. When the boy began bleeding again, Rasputin sat by his bedside, murmured prayers, placed a hand on his head, and the bleeding stopped. Maybe it was hypnosis, maybe chance, maybe faith. But to the Tsarina, it was nothing short of divine intervention. From that moment on, Rasputin wasn't just a guest, he was family. Alexandra believed God had sent him, that he was the only one keeping her son, and the empire, alive. She trusted him above all others. Even her husband, the Tsar, deferred to her faith. And as Rasputin's shadow lengthened over the palace, the line between royalty and mysticism began to blur. Because in saving the boy, Rasputin had bound himself to the throne, and in doing so, he had placed himself at the heart of a crumbling empire. It defied logic. It defied tradition. But there he was, a stinking peasant from Siberia, wandering through the gilded halls of the Romanov palace like he belonged there. Grigori Rasputin, unwashed, unshaven, his robes stained and his boots caked with mud, moved past crystal chandeliers and velvet curtains as if they meant nothing. Servants lowered their eyes, guards avoided his gaze, nobles whispered that he never blinked. Some swore they felt cold just being near him. He had no noble blood, no education, no military service. Yet Tsarina Alexandra clung to his every word. While generals argued over war and ministers begged for reform, Alexandra turned to Rasputin for advice, for prophecy, for comfort. He told her who to trust and who to fire. He soothed her when Alexei was ill. He reminded her that God had chosen them, and him. Soon, Rasputin began recommending bishops, dismissing senior officials, even dictating court appointments. Ministers were sacked overnight because of a whispered warning from the monk. Entire military campaigns were shifted because of his visions. Inside the palace, he was a holy man. Outside, he was seen as a parasite. Newspapers mocked him. Satirists painted him as the Tsarina's lover. But she didn't care. She believed he was the only one who truly understood her suffering. And Rasputin, cunning, confident, knew exactly how to feed that devotion. The empire was beginning to crack. Bread lines grew longer. Riots grew louder. Enemies circled. But within the royal walls, one man's influence was growing stronger than them all. Because while the Romanovs ruled in name, it was Rasputin, the peasant mystic, who now pulled the strings behind the throne. As Rasputin's power grew, so did the rumors. He noemde zichzelf in man van gut, maar zijn gedrag spraken under a towel. He was often drunk, loud, unfiltered. He roamed the streets of St. Petersburg at night, entering salons and brothels with the same confidence he carried into church. Women surrounded him, noble women, commoners, even nuns. Some claimed he healed them. Others said he touched them in ways no holy man should. Behind closed doors, whispers turned to scandal. It was said he held spiritual sessions where women removed their clothes to be cleansed, that he baptized them not with water, but with sweat and sin, and that afterward they wept, not from shame, but from ecstasy. Rasputin taught that to know God, one must fall, and fall deeply. That only through temptation, lust, and pain could one truly understand salvation. It was intoxicating, and for some, liberating. But not everyone was seduced. Nobles called him a devil. Church leaders called him a heretic. Politicians called him a national threat. And yet, none of it mattered, because the Tsarina still believed. She ignored the papers. She dismissed the rumors. Every time Alexei recovered, it only deepened her faith. To her, Rasputin was misunderstood, a holy man attacked by jealous cowards and faithless men. But outside the palace walls, public anger was boiling. How could a man like him be allowed such power? Was this who ruled Russia now? A peasant mystic drunk on lust and whispers? For many, Rasputin no longer symbolized salvation. He had become the face of corruption, a sign that the empire was not only weakening, it was rotting from within. By 1916, Russia was bleeding. The First World War had drained the empire of men, money, and morale. Soldiers fought barefoot in the snow. Villages were emptied of fathers, brothers, sons. Food ran out. Trains stopped running. Riots flared in the cities. And still, Rasputin remained. While the front lines collapsed, he thrived in the palace. Ministers came and went at his word. He whispered into Alexandra's ear while Nicholas II, the Tsar, struggled to hold the war together. He dismissed experienced generals, appointed friends, promised victories that never came. To the Russian people, it was a nightmare. Their emperor was absent. Their empress was obsessed. And the man they blamed, the bearded monk with piercing eyes, seemed untouchable. Cartoons mocked him. Newspapers called him a German spy, a sorcerer, a madman. Priests condemned him from the pulpit. Even nobles who once defended the monarchy now whispered, he must be removed. Inside the palace, Alexandra dug in deeper. She wrote letters to Nicholas praising Rasputin's wisdom, his guidance, his holy light. She begged him to ignore the court, the advisors, the press. To her, Rasputin wasn't the problem. He was the cure. But to everyone else, he had become the symbol of Russia's decay, a peasant ruling an empire, a madman deciding the fate of millions. The monarchy was cracking. The streets were restless, the army demoralized. And at the center of it all stood Rasputin, untouchable, grinning, and closer to the throne than ever before. What no one yet knew was that plans were already being drawn. In candlelit rooms and whispering circles, powerful men had come to a deadly conclusion. If the empire was to survive, Rasputin had to die. They had watched long enough. Princes, nobles, generals, once loyal to the Tsar, now met in secret. Over brandy and candlelight, they spoke a single name with clenched jaws: Rasputin. He had corrupted the court, they said. He had turned the Tsarina into a puppet. He was not just embarrassing the monarchy, he was destroying it. And so, a decision was made. Rasputin must die. Leading the plot was Prince Felix Yusupov, heir to one of the richest families in Russia. Young, eccentric, theatrical, but determined. Beside him stood Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, cousin to the Tsar, and Vladimir Perishkovich, a right-wing politician with fire in his veins. Together they would remove Rasputin, not with politics, but with poison and bullets. They lured him with flattery. Yusupov invited Rasputin to his palace on the night of December 30th, 1916. He promised music, wine, and the company of his beautiful wife. Rasputin, ever fond of such pleasures, agreed. The plan was meticulous. Poisoned cakes, poisoned wine, a revolver hidden beneath a silk cushion, a team of co-conspirators waiting upstairs, armed and ready. It wasn't just an assassination, it was a performance. One final act in the tragedy of a crumbling empire. As snow blanketed St. Petersburg that night, Rasputin entered the palace, laughing, unaware. He had survived scandals, war, and slander. He had outlived priests, bishops, even generals. But now, surrounded by silver cutlery and chandeliers, the men who once bowed to him prepared to kill what they saw as a monster. They believed they were saving Russia. But what they unleashed was a legend. December 30th, 1916, midnight in St. Petersburg. Rasputin entered the Yusupov palace wearing his usual tattered robes and crooked smile. He was greeted with warmth, music, and flattery. In the basement, a cozy table was set with cakes, wine, and cyanide. He ate. He drank. The conspirators waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Rasputin laughed, told stories, sipped more wine. But he didn't collapse. Panic set in. Felix Yusupov excused himself, rushed upstairs, grabbed a pistol, returned, and shot Rasputin in the chest. Rasputin fell to the floor, motionless. They celebrated, drank to the end of the mad monk. But when Yusupov came back to check the body, Rasputin opened his eyes. He stood up, bleeding, groaning, eyes full of rage. Rasputin staggered up the stairs and into the snowy courtyard. "He's alive!" someone screamed. They shot him again, and again. 3 bullets, one to the back, one to the head. He fell once more into the snow. Still not trusting death, they wrapped his body in a carpet, tied him in chains, and dragged him to the Neva River. The ice cracked, the water swallowed him. Days later, his body was recovered. Autopsy reports were chilling. Rasputin's lungs were filled with water. He had not died from poison, not from bullets, not from blood loss. He had drowned, which meant, in his final moments, he was still alive, struggling, fighting, refusing to die. The conspirators were horrified. What was this man? A demon? A prophet? Something in between? They had tried to erase a man. Instead, they gave birth to a myth. And by trying to silence him with violence, they made sure the world would never stop speaking his name. Before his death, Rasputin wrote a chilling letter to Tsarina Alexandra. "If I am killed by common men, you and your children will be safe. But if I am killed by nobles, within 2 years, your entire family will be destroyed by the Russian people." She kept the letter, hidden, pressed in a Bible. And when the news of Rasputin's death reached her, she wept. Not just for him, but for what it meant. Weeks later, the cracks in the empire split wide open. In February 1917, protests erupted in Petrograd. Food riots, strikes, mutiny. The royal guards joined the crowds. The Tsar, isolated at army headquarters, returned to a country he no longer ruled. On March 15, 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne. 300 years of Romanov rule, gone in a single signature. The royal family was imprisoned. First in the Alexander Palace, then Tobolsk, then Ekaterinburg. No titles, no power, just silence. Alexandra, once Empress of all Russia, now washed dishes in exile. Her son Alexei, once heir to the empire, grew weaker by the day. On the night of July 17, 1918, the Romanovs were led to a basement under the pretense of a photograph. There was no camera, there were no words, just bullets, dozens of them. Nicholas, Alexandra, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, Alexei, all murdered, their bodies dumped in shallow graves and covered with acid. And with that, Rasputin's prophecy, whether coincidence, madness, or true foresight, came to pass. The empire that mocked him, the nobles who killed him, the family who embraced him, all were gone. But Rasputin? His body was ash, his legend just getting started. Rasputin's body burned, his ashes scattered, his name condemned. And yet, over a century later, we still speak of him. Grigori Rasputin was no king. He had no army. He wrote no books, passed no laws, led no revolutions. And yet his shadow looms larger than most rulers of his time. Was he a mystic? A madman? A manipulator? Or was he simply a mirror, reflecting the fears and desires of a crumbling empire? Even now, the truth remains slippery. Some historians say he hypnotized the Tsarina. Others claim his healing was real. There are theories he was secretly working for Germany, or that he was the victim of a smear campaign. Eyewitness accounts contradict. Medical records vanished. His murder became legend. His life became myth. In popular culture, Rasputin became something else entirely. A villain, a wizard, an immortal. He appears in cartoons, horror films, metal songs, novels, and even disco anthems. Few figures from history have been reinvented so often, so wildly, and so persistently. Why? Because Rasputin was never just a man. He was an idea. A symbol of decay wrapped in holy cloth, of unchecked power hiding behind faith, of what happens when a dying empire places its hope in a force it does not understand. His enemies thought they were killing a man, but what they killed, or tried to, was a myth. And myths do not die easily. In life, Rasputin defied bullets, poison, and drowning. In death, he defied time, and somewhere in the frozen echoes of history, his eyes still seem to watch us. Unblinking, unforgotten, and perhaps unbeaten.